Oh, oh, yeah. Oh, oh, yeah.
Hey guys, it's Emily, the controversial mom, and I have quite the controversial topic for us today. I want to talk about social emotional learning, or SEL. Now, if you listened to Phil's show recently, you probably heard me join and talk about this a little bit. I've also written some op eds with 1819 News talking about it. And I was on with Brian Dawson, the 1819 podcast, not too long ago, also talking about it. So, as you can tell, it is definitely a topic that is on my brain. And I have known about it for quite some time, but I've never really dug into all the details of it. So I've known about it at a high level. I could probably give you a 30-second spiel on it, but I couldn't get any further than that up until recently. I was on a Moms for Liberty call recently, and SEL came up and kind of the evolution of SEL and where we are now, specifically as it pertains to the threat to parental rights in our public schools. So, knowing that, I had to get up to speed really fast, and I have spent probably the past 3 weeks reading nothing but social emotional learning, the background on it, the funding sources, where we are today, all the things. So I am going to be doing a more or less a series on this topic because SEL is very broad and there's multiple layers to this. And there's no way I can tell you this in 30 minutes and you actually retain any of the information. So I'm going to kind of break it down really and truly based on how I've read it and focus on specific pieces to hopefully give you a better understanding of it. And I'm probably going to end up writing some op eds on it just because I've got too much content in my head and I need to get it out. And that's kind of how I get it out of my brain, is to write it down. So there's a lot of information on SEL. Like I said, I've been focusing on this for probably 3 weeks. I have about 2 4-inch binders full of information that I have printed, read, color coded, tabbed, all the things. It is a lot. So let me start at the very beginning on this and kind of tell you what social emotional learning is and all the different layers to it and where we are today and why I say it's probably one of the greatest threats to parental rights that we're facing right now. And yet somehow no one knows about this. So we've got to fix that. So let's start at the beginning. Social emotional learning. It started by an organization called CASEL about 20 years ago. It's not necessarily owned by CASEL. There's multiple organizations out there that talk about SEL, but CASEL's kind of leading the way in it, if you will, because they've been around doing it for so long. So there's 5 key competencies with social emotional learning. There's self-management, responsible decision making, relationship skills, social awareness, and self-awareness. So those are the 5 you see most common if you were to search up SEL. Those are the things you're going to see. So those are the 5 competencies that most states, most schools focus on. Now they may change up the wording a little bit, but for the most part, those are the 5 they're going to focus on. And then within those 5, there's different skills that students have to, air quotes, obtain to achieve the competency. In Alabama, I think I've talked about it before on the podcast, in the counseling podcast that I did, where it talks about the School Counseling Association. There's like a 90-page booklet that the Alabama School Counseling Association put out. Within that, you actually see all of the competencies and then all the skills underneath it that kids have to achieve. And it breaks it down based on, the K through 2, 3 through 5, whatever the grade levels are. I also learned in my reading that Alabama is one of few states that actually has SEL competencies starting in pre K. So there's a fun fact for you. We start this stuff very young in Alabama. But nonetheless, those are the 5 key competencies of SEL. Obviously, nothing in that sounds extremely dangerous. It sounds very rational, everyday type stuff. So, in a nutshell, let me tell you what SEL really is. It is emotions regulations. It is unlicensed therapy. Now, why do I say it's unlicensed therapy? Because you have school counselors, you have teachers, you have administrators, you have whoever it is that is focusing on the emotional state of your child on a daily basis. And I say daily basis because SEL isn't everything, and I will get to that in a minute. But it is all about managing your emotions. And it is by school administrators that have absolutely zero expertise, training, or education in this field. It is all about asking the child constantly how they feel. What is your emotional state? They're called emotional check ins. And in some states, they literally start their class every single day by asking kids how they feel. Now, as an adult, starting that way, we would kind of dismiss it and we would move on. But for children, starting your day that way truly sets the expectations in your mindset for the entire day. There are days when my son gets up and he's just grouchy as he can be. And I know when he goes to school, he's going to have a bad day because he woke up in a bad mood and he's going to stay that way. So I do my best to make him happy before he leaves home to try to make things better. But if he gets to school and the first thing the teacher says is, "Who's having a bad day?" He's just going to focus on the fact that he's unhappy and having a bad day. And the rest of the day, that's how he's going to feel. That is social emotional learning. And that is the danger in it, is that it's forcing kids to fixate on their emotions. It's rumination. And it's by someone that's not certified or trained to deal with emotions. It is extremely dangerous. So that's SEL really in a nutshell. There's a whole lot more to it, but that's kind of it in a very condensed way that normal people like us can actually follow. So you got SEL, that's kind of the basic level. Then you go up to something that's called transformative SEL. Transformative SEL is fully integrated into the curriculum. So, as an example, and I've probably shared this before, transformative SEL would be last year, my son was in third grade. They were having a science class, and the science lesson was about weather patterns. And specifically, when you're moving from winter into spring and you've got currents of air coming through, those form tornadoes. And well, what do you do during a tornado? And it starts talking about tornado sirens. And then in the middle of all of this very science focused discussion, you've got the question of how do you feel when there's a tornado siren going off? That is transformative SEL. In the middle of a very technical conversation around science, we have to bring in the emotional conversation. So, of course, children answer this question and, I feel scared. I feel worried. I want my mom. I want my dad. I want to be at home, whatever the answer may be. So instead of focusing on the science aspect of it, children are now focused on, well, this makes me sad. This makes me scared. I want my parents. I want to be, wherever my safe space is. And kids can't focus on the lesson at hand because we put them in this almost traumatic state of dealing with emotions. That is extremely dangerous, not to mention it's just not helpful in terms of learning the content in front of you. But we've put them back in this state of, this is how I constantly feel. My emotional check in, yet again, in the middle of science class. Transformative SEL integrates emotional regulation into everything. I saw some examples even in like California where they have math has all of this emotional context within it. How do you feel when you take a math test? How do you feel if you fail a math test? I mean, it's just constant focus on emotion. So that's transformative SEL. Again, it's bad, but it's still not the worst. The worst is this new version that's kind of coming into play. And I'm not going to use the exact terminology because, like I said, it's new. I've read about it, but I haven't quite got all of it, to sink in my head just yet. But it is trauma focused SEL. And it is exactly what it sounds like. It is dealing with children that have truly suffered from some form of trauma. And then they're obviously having an emotional reaction to it. So, with trauma focused SEL, this starts getting very serious because, again, SEL is unlicensed therapy. You've got administrators that have no certification in therapy dealing with a child that has truly suffered a traumatic event. So what happens in these situations is schools are partnering with external organizations, for lack of a better term, that actually have the experts on hand, right? Like a psychologist, a psychiatrist, a certified therapist, whatever it may be. So, in this situation where a child comes in and they've truly suffered a traumatic event, the school will contact this external organization to come provide the necessary services, expertise in the situation, which is what we need happening. Of course, if a child's traumatized and had this horrible event, we want them getting the right help that they need. So, not that we're against any of that. The challenge in all of this is the parental consent aspect. If a child comes in and they've said something happened to them, schools are they have to contact the right authorities, the right experts, whoever it may be. So if a child comes in and says, I'm a 14-year-old girl, I had a really bad night, I just feel really depressed, I feel like I may be suicidal, I want to seek help. In trauma focused SEL, the school is going to contact this external organization and say, we have a situation, can you send a therapist over? And of course, a therapist is going to come and they're going to sit down with this child and say, what led you to say this? How are you feeling? How do we get through it? All good things. No one's going to question that. But if it's a minor and the school is doing this without parental consent, we've got major issues. Now, this kind of goes back to what I mentioned in my podcast about counseling, where we've got this imminent threat situation. If someone's saying they're suicidal, absolutely, we've got to get help for them, but the parent has to be brought into these conversations. With trauma focused SEL, that's not necessarily a requirement, depending upon the policies that the school and the state have, or laws that the state have. So it gets really dicey really quick. It gets really great really quick because you want kids to be able to get the support they need, but you've got to do it in a context of where the parent's involved in the conversation. And with trauma focused SEL, those two things don't necessarily line up. The school, again, in most states, the school is going to focus on the child and say, parents, stay out of it. We've got this. That is the danger with trauma focused SEL. Schools develop these partnerships with these external organizations and they just handle stuff. If a kid comes in and says they've got this issue, then the school is just going to contact this external organization and bring them in. Now, in the state of Alabama, this is where it gets really dangerous because our medical age of consent, or it's technically called medical age of majority. I say consent because it's just what people can comprehend, especially myself. The age of consent in Alabama is 14. So at 14 years old, your daughters can get on birth control whether you as a parent consent or not. Your 14-year-old can get a vaccine whether you as a parent consent or not. Now, most 14-year-olds I know still can't drive, so parents are having to take them to the doctor. And there's some level of involvement with the parents so they could kind of stop this. With transformative SEL, where we are now is just kind of the beginning. Where it's evolving to, and in some states we're already there, is something called the whole child. The whole child is really about school systems treating the whole child academically, socially, emotionally, physically, cognitively. So, in some states, and to my knowledge, Alabama's not here yet, but we're not too far off. But in some states, under the whole child method, you have medical clinics embedded within the school. Now, it may be a physical building on the campus, it may just be a doctor that comes in, it may just be a room where a nurse sits, it can vary. But in the whole child model, the school is treating every aspect of the child. So, hypothetically, in the state of Alabama, a 14-year-old can go to school, can say that they need to go see the clinic in the school. They could say that they're severely depressed and have anxiety, and they can get on medication while at school, and the parent would never know because we've removed that aspect of the parent having to take a child to a doctor's office to at least have some level of knowledge of what's going on. In the whole child approach, all of this is done at school. So you're sending your child to school and you have absolutely no idea that they're going to a clinic to truly get life altering medication and you have no insight. Now, like I said, in the state of Alabama, age of consent is 14. So this could happen and a parent would never know. In New Jersey, the age of consent up there is 16, which is crazy that a very blue state has a higher age of majority than we do, but nonetheless, it's 16 in New Jersey. So if you lived in New Jersey and this was happening, 16, you could go get all these things. At 14, technically, the school has to tell you, depending upon what state laws are. So this whole evolution of SEL from the basics of 5 competencies where we've just got to make sure we're doing, building good relationships and what were they, managing self-management and all of that. Now it's evolved into the whole child, where schools are actually in a position to allow children to get medical care without any form of parental oversight. It is extremely dangerous where this is headed. It is in Alabama. Let me be very clear with you. I'm still doing a ton of research on all of it. I've put out FOIA requests or records requests with this Department of Education, several other organizations. So I'm still collecting data. Right now, everything I've looked at and everything I've talked about today is at a high level all across the country. It's not specific to Alabama at all, it's everywhere. But I can tell you from all of my reading, this whole child program is absolutely in the state of Alabama. A lot of this is funded federally, no surprise there. Alabama gets a lot of money from the federal government. I can't cite the exact number off the top of my head, but I did find it this weekend. Our Department of Education gets billions of dollars from the federal government. And a lot of that is going into these mental health programs in the schools. 2 years ago, well, no, I guess it was last year in 23, the Department of Education gave out $14 million to 25 different school districts across the state to help with mental health programs. Now, they weren't necessarily the whole child program, but they're borderline on it. I'm still digging through that. But my point in this is that the federal government is pushing money into our state. These programs are in our state. They are evolving. I have read the documents. I will be putting out as much of that as I can as I collect all of it and make sure that I'm releasing it in a way that people can follow because, like I said, it's a lot. But just know this is a serious topic. Parents need to know about this because it's dangerous. It's usurping parental authority. It's dangerous to your kids. 14-year-olds should not be making these type of decisions without any type of parental consent. Birth control is really becoming a hot topic these days in terms of long-term impacts that it's having on the female reproductive system. At 14, girls can get on this without parents knowing it, and they really can do long-term damage to their bodies because they're 14, they don't know any better, and they think it's just cool because all their friends are on birth control. That's the type of stuff we're dealing with. So we've got to stop this. So, like I said, I'm going to be putting out more on this topic because it's just a lot. It's very heavy, and I'm trying to do this in pieces. I'm trying to start at the beginning, at the top level, and just explain what SEL is and kind of all the layers. And then I want to focus on Alabama, what's going on in Alabama, and then to some extent focus on what's happening in some of the districts. I can't cover every one of them because there's too many, but for the ones I've got information on, just to help you understand, this is a widespread issue across our state. It's not really just one area like a blue county or anything like that. So I'm going to focus a lot on it. If you have questions, by all means, reach out and let me know. If you comment online and I don't respond, just call Phil Show and tell him to yell at me or something. Because I'm sure you're going to have questions. I know that I have, like I said, I've printed everything out. I've highlighted, I've made notes, I've tabbed, I've done all the things, and I have just lots of questions that I've got to go back and figure out. So it is a lot, but it's extremely important. We need more parents aware of what's happening, at least to the point that they can ask questions in their school and figure out what's going on and asking their kids what's going on there, because that's a really important one. So thanks for joining. Thank you for letting me share all of this because it's a lot. I hope that you found it useful. And if you have questions, let me know. And until next time, have a good one.